going to wait until people get in here, and I know that you can hear me. I'm switching around my mic. I do not have my gimbal, and I am I'm a little bit early. I have been trying to do these from Friday afternoon about noon, so I'm a little early today. I'm going to wait and see if a few people get in because I came all the way up to San Mateo, so I want to make sure my sound is good. LB Strider, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me okay? Good morning. Can Sixth Estate, can you hear me? I want to make sure my mic is working. Okay, can you guys hear? Hello, good morning. Good morning, San Mateo. Okay, great. Thanks for Mike for telling, or Mac McDougall for telling me that my sound is on. That's what I was waiting for. So I'm in San Mateo County at the courthouse. And I was a little bit late for a hearing this morning. It was set for 8:30 and I wanted to watch it. It was a hearing involving the disqualification of a district attorney. And here in San Mateo County, the district attorney is Steve Wagstaff. And he's been the district attorney for a very long time. And right now, the county's having some issues with their sheriff. They're trying to remove the sheriff. And it feels very much like what happened in Santa Clara County with the district attorney there and the sheriff in that area. So I came down to go to the courthouse because the issue this morning was the disqualification of the district attorney's office. So we're going to talk about that a little bit because more and more, a lot of these family law cases are overlapping to criminal cases. And so it's really important that everybody understand the disqualification process. So here in San Mateo County, there is a district attorney or prosecutor, and I have to get the file. I'm going to do that today. And what they did was they are prosecuting somebody for making threats on the DA. And that prosecution, I believe it's a felony. And the witness in the case is the prosecutor who is claiming that they made the threat. And somebody who works for the courts, a clerk or somebody, is the witness. And so the disqualification was supposedly, and I have to read it still, but the disqualification claims that somebody can't get a fair trial if the victim, the witnesses, and the entire court system is basically running the show. And the individual who is being charged is being represented by the Independent Defense Office or the Indigent Defense Office. And I'm not sure what they call that here, but that's when the public defender claims a conflict of interest. And then the taxpayers pay for the defense with an independent panel of criminal defense attorneys. So the disqualification, when I went into the courtroom, obviously I hadn't done a media request for it, so I didn't have a right to record in the courtroom, but the bailiff told me that it was already over. So I missed the hearing. I'm going to have to look it up. But the reason that it's important is because the district attorney who is elected here in this county is Steve Wagstaff. He has been the DA here for a really long time. And he wrote the book on how prosecutors and district attorneys are supposed to behave ethically. And I'm going to post that. In fact, I'm probably going to post it as a short. Hey, friends in code, I just want to tell you thank you for that because I came up here on gas with fumes today and I still have to go fill up to get back. And so I really appreciate that $20. Thank you very much. So the district attorney here, what he does is when they're prosecuting cases, there's been case law, and I'm going to try to find it, but there's been case law that says, hey, if you're in the show, you don't get to also prosecute it, be the witnesses. Probably the judges came from the DA's office because usually judges come from the prosecutor's office. And so it really just has an appearance of unfairness. And it's very much similar. We see that happen in family court cases where judges who are working in the courts or court clerks or even police officers and attorneys, when they're having their divorce cases, it just has an optic of a feeling of unfairness that people would be, that a jury would be called to hear, or a judge would hear a case where they're all buddies or they all know each other and they've formed opinions and ideas and biases. So the same concepts that apply in criminal court apply in family court and in court proceedings where there are no juries. So this weekend, I'm going to drop a video about the court reporter issue here in California, because the court reporters, Otto, thank you very much for that. I really, really appreciate that, you guys. When I do these live streams, I have to travel a great deal. And so when you guys reach out and reach in your pockets and support me doing that, it lets me do more work. And so this morning, I am coming to in San Mateo County. This is a county that right now is in the mainstream news over issues related to their sheriff, but there's never seems to be any information about the district attorney, and about the district attorney not disqualifying or recusing themselves from cases when they should. And that was what I came up here to see, because as you guys know, I was prosecuted by the DA in Santa Clara County for recording a police officer in violation of a local court rule. And all of the judges assigned to my case, I had 70 hearings. In fact, I want to point out that the DA in Santa Clara County prosecuted me harder than he prosecutes people who do bad things to children, unlive other people. And we have to think about that, because that's called a political prosecution. And so when I hear that a criminal defense attorney is having to, there's the sheriff in San Mateo, but when a criminal defense attorney is having to file a motion to disqualify the district attorney's office, it makes us think about, well, why didn't that district attorney just recuse themselves in the first place? And a lot of times we find in certain cases, these political cases, the DAs will not recuse because they want to keep all their dirty laundry in the courthouse. They don't want other counties hearing what they're doing. And in Orange County, there was a huge problem with the snitches. They were getting jailhouse informants to testify and playing some really dirty games. That's back in the news. That was in the news for a long time. And so there's no reporters covering these cases anymore, you guys. We're doing it. This is what we're doing. We're coming to the courthouses. We're listening for these little motions, the little voices, because one person who has a district attorney not recuse, if the public were watching and the media were watching, they probably would. And so I'll probably have to write an article about that this weekend. It'll go in the Davis Vanguard. I'll post it in my community posts. But I want to get back to why a DA should disqualify. There are about 100 reasons why they should. And it isn't even just people who are charged with crimes, but when district attorneys don't, we're going to walk away this way a little bit because I'm going to show you. This is the courthouse. Somebody noisy is coming. Oh, it's a skateboarder. This is the courthouse, but right next door is the county building. And remember, we've been talking a lot about government attorneys, county attorneys. And here it's very obvious how close the proximity is to the judicial branch and the executive branch when you can literally walk right next door to the government building of the county. And that's where you find county council, which, by the way, county council and city attorneys can bring criminal cases. So they do work very closely with the courts. They can do code enforcement cases here. And that just reminds us of how close the proximity to this is. So I want to go back to the disqualifications, and then I'm going to read your questions if anybody has any. But a disqualification or a recusal of a DA's office is similar to what we see when people ask a judge to recuse, because there is an appearance of unfairness, an appearance that there could be conflicts of interest, and it goes either way, either somebody being favorable to the defendant or certain attorneys, or kind of retaliating against them. And that's what there's an appearance in this case, that the person who is being charged with threatening the DA, there's an appearance that this is kind of over the top. And when the only evidence is that the DA and a court staffer are the witnesses claiming that the crime happened, that is a harder pill to swallow for a jury. And that's when we look at how political are these issues. And we've seen courts interpreting what a threat is very politically as well. People say things in anger all the time, especially at the government. And if a DA has a history of being corrupt or unfair, then people might say things, and the DA, in order to keep that from getting out, is probably going to retaliate in the form of prosecuting for certain crimes that they wouldn't prosecute other people for. The other thing I want to point out here is the lack of local news. So back in the day, there would be reporters covering all these cases. There'd be reporters in the courtrooms. And now the Daily Journal, that's owned by a company that is, hey, thanks, Otto. I really, really appreciate you guys. You really, you support me. That's the way that we get this done, because we don't have backing from legacy media. But I want to show you, this is the status of local news outside of the courthouse. There is Peninsula News, which looks like a free paper, and you can see the headlines there. Then the Metro, which is an independently owned paper that is, and it's paper thin. It's almost not even news by the time they print it up. That's owned by Dan Pulcrano. Then they're advertising new homes in the area, showing the priority of real estate. But look, this is the Mercury News. This is the main paper here. This is the newspaper, and we're going to get to why this is a problem in this case today. This is the newspaper where their reporters, editors, and columnists and opinion writers all met at that Bar Bench Media Police Committee that I reported on. And that was that secret group that started in 2018, and when in 1988 it was formed, and it was run out of the grand jury budget in Santa Clara County. But Steve Wagstaff, and I'll post that in my post sections later, he's the DA, and he went to those meetings. And those meetings were attended by the San Jose Mercury reporters, NBC Bay Area, but the rest of us didn't know they were going on. And they held political forums. They talked about cases that were in the criminal courts. They talked about federal lawsuits against police officers, and the public didn't get to hear what was being said. And when we started reporting on it, they of course closed the club down. But the fact is that from 1988 until 2023, when we started reporting on, hey, this isn't how you're supposed to run government, this is conflicts of interest. You have police officers, reporters, politicians, and everybody else here. Then they shut it down. And they haven't done anything to correct the harm that might have come from it. And that's the same idea when you go into a criminal case and you try to disqualify the district attorney or a judge or somebody, and they refuse, and it puts you into the court process. And you can appeal it, but if you don't appeal it, then you waive the right to claim that it was unfair. So we were here today to kind of watch that hearing. This is another case where I hadn't done a media request a long time in advance, and so I couldn't record or photograph. I could only report what I saw, and there's no other reporters doing that. So we're going to be talking a lot about disqualifications of judges and district attorneys and people who shouldn't be in cases. We're going to talk about attorneys, privately paid attorneys, who could get disqualified from cases and why that is. But right now, in addition to this case where the district attorney is being challenged for being biased and they're trying to get him recused, we're covering that case in Santa Clara. We did mark the process server serving that case federally against Judge Hendrickson. And then 2 weeks later, Judge Hendrickson was served with a disqualification motion. So what happened in that case was Judge Hendrickson answered the disqualification. And it is very rare that a judge answers a disqualification. Usually they strike it. And when a judge strikes something, it means you didn't have any right to bring it, you don't have any facts or anything else. But when they answer it, they're claiming that the facts and the claims and the allegations are false. And so when a judge answers a disqualification, then it has to go to a judge out of the county. it goes to the state judicial council for reassignment, and it goes out of the county for another neutral judge who hasn't been going to all the little clubs with the judge being disqualified. Well, the problem in Santa Clara County is after Judge Hendrickson answered and gave some mistruths in her answer, she recused from the case, said it would be in the interest of justice. And I want to talk about that for a minute because this is a little secret that took me years to know. The interest of justice, or the inherent authority of the court, gives a judge to do whatever the hell they want. They can make an order to undo orders. They can make an order to void orders, give amnesty. They can make orders to disqualify a DA. They can make orders to disqualify a judge. They can do just about anything with the power that we give them to be a judge. And Cindy Hendrickson used her power so that when she was served with a disqualification and divorce attorney Nicole Ford was given a copy, the father in the case was going to appear remotely with his attorneys. And before they came into the case, Cindy Hendrickson closed the courtroom. And so one of the issues that we look at is why courtrooms or court files are sealed, because there has to be a really, really good reason to close a courtroom. And one of the issues that came up in that case is it was a parentage case. And so for all of you who've been through the family courts and you weren't married, you understand that you're treated differently in the family courts than people who are divorced and were married and they're going through the same custody issues. So in California, we kept the parentage cases of unwed parents confidential. And when we did, that meant that reporters couldn't see the files, we couldn't get to it. And it also meant that judges could close the courtrooms. Well, Cindy Hendrickson was presiding over a parentage case when she closed the courtroom. And a judge has the inherent authority to close a courtroom. That's their kingdom. They get to do that. But what they don't get to do is they don't get to close a courtroom without notice to the parties, meaning that everybody who's involved in that lawsuit has a right to respond, their attorneys and everybody else. And Cindy Hendrickson colluded with Nicole Ford, who was the attorney for the mother in the case, and they closed the public out of those proceedings, and they didn't even bother to tell the other side. Then a week later, Judge Hendrickson answered the disqualification, and then 2 weeks after that, she held a hearing in the case, which is stayed. That's the other thing that happens is when you file a disqualification motion, it stays the proceedings. So if you're going to be talking about support or going to trial, that's what happened here this morning. When there was a disqualification against the DA, it can't go to trial because that issue has to be resolved. And it may even have to go all the way up to the Court of Appeal or to the Supreme Court, because you can't have something that is considered unfair tainting the trial all the way through the litigation process. So in the custody case with the judge trying to get disqualified, the judge not only closed the courtroom, which is absolute First Amendment retaliation because they had a right to file that disqualification on Cindy Hendrickson, but she closed the courtroom and kicked court watchers out. So you guys know I did a little video about that. That was pretty outrageous. Well, it gets even more outrageous. And what is more outrageous is that the attorney in that case filed a motion picking the judges, giving suggestions of the judges they would consider could fairly hear the case and decide if she was disqualified. And he also filed another paper about the judge closing the courtroom, which was further evidence of bias. And that couldn't have been in the record because she closed the courtroom after she was served with the disqualification. Well, the court clerks down there are not filing those motions. And those motions started being filed in mid-February, and here we are March 7th, and they are not filing it. So there is a rule and a law that says the court clerk has to file any document that is presented to them for filing. And in Santa Clara County, apparently they just make up their own rules because they have not filed that disqualification. So now we're going to see how they did in San Mateo with the disqualification of this DA. So Steve Wagstaff is very closely connected to Santa Clara County, where they're making up their rules on disqualification. And that's why we're here. So I appreciate everybody who came in. I'm going to stand back a little bit. I can see your comments. I've been pacing to move it, but not too much because I was going into court, so I didn't bring my gimbal, and I still haven't worked out that horizontal filming. But I wanted to talk about the disqualification of Judge Cindy Hendrickson and of the DA up here in San Mateo County and what it means. So I want to say one more thing too, because I didn't know this and understand this when I started reporting on the courts. When before a case gets to before a jury, there have been lots of motions. That means there's been lots of arguing in court about should the DA be disqualified, what evidence can a jury hear, that kind of thing. I'm showing you this pretty little bush too while we're out here. It has little pink flowers because it's starting to be spring here. And so disqualifying a judge or the other preliminary motions that you can have in a hearing all have to be done before a jury is pulled in a criminal case. So the jury never knows all this stuff went on before they get in that courtroom. And the battle legally with lawyers and judges happens for months before that trial starts. Pre-trial motions, motions in limine, motions to disqualify, motions to exclude evidence, motions for sanctions. Sanctions in criminal court could be terminating sanctions. If they find out that the DA withheld evidence, then they can disqualify the DA or they can terminate the case. So the reason that's important is say they actually catch somebody who really did a crime, they deserve a fair trial. But if the DA is lazy and cheating and withholding evidence, then that person's going to get off and they're not going to get tried again. So a bad district attorney can let people go or can mischarge other people. And that's what we're reporting on in the courts. And the case involving Cindy Hendrickson, the judge, even though it's not directly related to the issue, the mother in that case was referred by the Campbell police for 2 felony counts of harming a child. And turns out the disqualification motion points out that she wasn't ultimately charged because she was buddies with one of the prosecutors who prosecuted felony cases. And they used their Venmo accounts, they used their social media accounts to prove this relationship. And while that wasn't relevant to the judge being disqualified, the judge was being asked to remove herself from the case because she had not disclosed that she sat on a political committee with the mother's attorney. So there was an appearance that this one dad in this case, who is just dealing with child custody, has gone through all this litigation when the mom had everything all stacked in her favor with the divorce attorney who sat on a political committee with the judge and also arguably helped the judge get elected through a nonprofit known as Women SV. And so the judge claimed she didn't have any connection to Women SV. And there are supplemental papers that say she did. There were news articles. In fact, there were news articles, and this is why newspapers are important, is there were news articles in that Palo Alto Daily newspaper, the Willow Glen Times, of Cindy Hendrickson getting awards for, she was getting awards for unsung hero for some made up thing. And so when, we always talk about following the money, I follow the awards because usually when they're giving awards to police officers or somebody else, they've been a team player. And that's something that we need to look at. But Cindy Hendrickson was also in that Bar Bench Media Police Committee with Steve Wagstaff, the DA here, the DA in Santa Clara County. She was in the clubs. She was in all the clubs, and she didn't ever disclose that. And that creates, sorry, I got a call, and I just stopped it for a sec. So it was the newspapers and the history that was documented by the newspapers that has contributed to the disqualification motion that is not being filed in Santa Clara County against the judge. And so now we're going to see how they're doing in San Mateo. But I just want to show you, these are the newspapers for the area. They're blank. Look at this one here. This is one of my favorites. There's just leaves in there. I don't even know what that was. The Daily News, that's on the peninsula something, and here's where it's distributed. But these people are not serious newspaper people. They're not here. They don't have their reporters here. And so we don't know about the unfairness in our courts when reporters don't show up. So when you guys come on the live stream, there's 113 people watching at 11 o'clock, at 10:15 in the morning in California on a Friday. And I don't know where you all are. If you can say where you're watching from, that would be really helpful. The people who are probably involved in all of this are probably in court right now, so they're not watching, but I'm going to leave this posted so they'll see your comments. And I'm going to go over your comments right now if you want to ask something about disqualification. So to be clear, we're up here in San Mateo County where they're trying to disqualify a member from the district attorney's office. And we have a connection from the DA here to that Bar Bench Media Police Committee, which connects to Cindy Hendrickson, who was a member of that committee, and the reporters, the sheriffs, the police officers, the police chiefs, who were all in there in that club from 1988 to 2023 when they closed it. And this is what the San Jose Mercury was reporting about that club. Absolutely nothing. And so if we don't have reporters reporting on what's going on in our courts, there is going to be a lot more unfairness going on. And that's your tax dollars. That's a matter of public safety, because if we're prosecuting innocent people and we're letting guilty people go, that affects all of our communities. So, okay, I'm going to ask for, if you guys have any questions about disqualifications, if you've seen a disqualification motion, the other kind of motion that can be filed in court, which is really important in advance of a criminal or a civil case, is a change of venue. And that's when somebody claims that there's been too much media attention. But more recently, we see that when there are all these little groups and clubs, that somebody could say, hey, I'm not going to get a fair trial here, because all the judges and the lawyers and the litigants know each other, and one person is kind of out. So there can be change of venue motions too. But this is the disqualification of a prosecutor from the DA's office. I'm going to have to go through the court file and report on it the old-fashioned way because I missed the hearing, and I'll give you guys updates in my posts. So, Johnny, do you guys have any questions about disqualifications of DAs, judges, changes of venue? Because that's really why I was here today, is to start reporting on that, and why there is an appearance of unfairness, how the courts are working, the clerks not filing paperwork. That's a violation of the law. The law says that anybody who presents documents for filing to the court clerk, the clerk must file it. And so the fact that the clerks in Santa Clara County are not filing documents, I don't know if that's a problem up here in San Mateo too, but I do hear about that. And then the other thing we're going to be reporting on all this weekend is the court reporter issue, because we now know from a lawsuit that's filed in the California Supreme Court that over 1 million hearings a year are not being documented because there are not court reporters in those hearings, and because the courts are no longer paying for court reporters the way they used to. So for those of you who are in family court in Santa Clara, and it's different in every single courthouse, but it used to be that you paid $90 to have a hearing and made a motion before the court. And of that $90, 30 went to make sure that there would be a court reporter there. And so what they've done is they've kept the costs of filing those motions about just as high. In fact, I think somebody told me it's about $100 now, and yet you don't have a court reporter. So if you want to get a court reporter, you know what, you guys, I'm going to just kind of get behind these people. So good morning. So this is what we're talking about, is that when sheriff's deputies are closely connected to some other member of the public, maybe he's a private investigator, who knows, but there can be an appearance that, hey, everybody's friends up here, everybody's in the big club. And if you're going through the courts and you're not, it can be really very troubling because you see one thing out on the street and you see another thing in the courtroom, and that's what creates an appearance of unfairness. So, um, that's what we're doing up here today. I'm going to keep going over disqualifications of judges, of district attorneys, of private attorneys. There are reasons that you can disqualify a private attorney. And this is for anybody who has opposed one of those really aggressive attorneys who seems to be funded unlimited with unlimited funds and they pull out all the dirty tricks. You can disqualify a private attorney, and we know of that being done. Thank you, Johnny. I really appreciate that. We know that there was a famous case here. I'm going to close off with this one last story because this is what it took to get a private attorney disqualified from a high asset divorce case. So this one I covered a lot. In fact, I'll post this in my community posts as well. There was a divorce attorney. His name was Brad Baugh, and he had a lot of cases here in San Mateo County, and he had them in. He also had them in Santa Clara County. And he did a lot of what we call ghost representation. And that's when a private attorney goes on a team with other attorneys and they're in the background helping with strategy. They get paid a lot of money, but that's one of the things that they do. And so Brad Baugh one day stole a paralegal from a case of his opposing counsel. So the opposing counsel was, I believe it was either Walter Hammond or Catherine Schlepphorst. And whoever called me the other day about Kathy Schlepphorst getting appointed as minors counsel, she's really been in the thick of the club for a long time. And thank you, Jody. I appreciate it very much. And so Kathy Schlepphorst, Walter Hammond, and they brought in Robin Yeamans to the case. So there were 3 attorneys opposing one attorney, Brad Baugh. And you always used to think, well, how does Brad Baugh do that? Well, the way he did it was he had a big bench. He had a lot of other attorneys that were ghost attorneys that would help him. He had a network. He had a group of people, just like the prosecutors here have DA investigators and buddies in the sheriff's department and witnesses who will give false testimony. That's what Brad Baugh had, only it was in private divorce cases. So he represented some really infamous people. David Sheridan, who did horrible things to his wife and his children. But my favorite was the Drew Perkins case. And in that case, that was 2 rich people. Drew Perkins, the way the people inside the case described it as was that he invented the dial-up to the internet. So that was a long time ago. So in Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, we see all these divorce cases involving the people who created technology, the internet, the apps, the Apple phone that we're currently on, Google that we're currently broadcasting on. So all those people had divorce cases. And there is a personality type where people are willing to pay divorce lawyers more money than they're willing to pay their ex-spouses and their children. And so they'll fight and they'll pay for the fight. So in this case, Brad Baugh fought dirty. He always fought dirty. He hired the paralegal from the wife's team, and the way they found out was a process server. So, we've been doing a lot of videos about Mark the process server. Process servers know a lot, and if they'd all wear body cameras, I think a lot of litigation would not happen, because sometimes people just want to stop their spouse cold in their tracks and not necessarily go through the whole court process. And just getting served with a lawsuit can be startling to people. So anyway, they found out that Brad Baugh had stolen the paralegal from the process server. And this is what they had to do to get Brad Baugh disqualified from that case. They had to hire an expert by the name of Richard Flamm. And this was back in, I think, 1992. I'll look it up in my files. But Richard Flamm charged $40,000 as a consultant on what would constitute a disqualification of an attorney. So think about that and what we were talking about this morning here in San Mateo, where there's a public defender or an independent counsel trying to disqualify a district attorney. It's similar litigation. And if that privately costs about $40,000, then that's what it costs taxpayers when the district attorney doesn't recuse and the paid public defender or the independent defense counsel has to file the motion, it should be the equivalent of about $40,000. But we know that county governments are always going to limit the defense for poor people. They're just not going to give them a defense. They're going to pressure them for a coercive plea because they don't want these cases going to a jury. One, because of the cost, but two, they don't want juries hearing all this crud is going on in the courts. So Brad Baugh in that case, I remember reading the transcripts. And that's another reason why the transcripts are so important. The case was actually in front of Judge Persky. And Judge Persky is the judge who got recalled. And Cindy Hendrickson, who we started talking about at the beginning of this on the judge disqualification, replaced him. But Judge Persky disqualified Brad Baugh from that case. He said Brad Baugh had been unethical and he had violated the rules that apply to fair litigation. And so he went out of the case, and the father then hired James McManus, who you've seen me talk about before, and that's one of those big fancy law firms. So I'm just going to show you, this is San Mateo. I'm going to give you a little bit of I believe that's the jail right there. This is the back side of the court building. This is the front side, but they now make you go through the back. And then the county building is up there on the corner. So it's all just in one little area, even though it's a very, very wealthy county. They have lots of resources. You can see the connections of how this all is such a tightly knit community, and it can feel like a club. So thank you, everybody. I hope I didn't jiggle you around too much. Somebody has a message held for review. I'll review that later. Someone said, Johnny Bravo said, later Noli, so I hope Noli D is in here. I missed you, girl. I haven't seen you for a while. Johnny, nice to have you in here. Thank you, everybody, for all of the little tips and the comments. And I'm going to go back now and I'll read your comments, and we're going to start reporting on these disqualifications of attorneys, prosecutors, and judges, and why it's important to not only an appearance of fairness, but actual fairness in the courts. So thanks, you guys. And this is San Mateo, and thanks for making it possible for me to be here.